I ultimately cost my employer a six-figure sum. And it all started when they tried to save a few $100s on my paycheck. My name is Leo, and I used to work in loss prevention for a regional chain of electronics stores we'll call Electromart. My job was pretty straightforward. I'd patrol the store in plain clothes, keeping an eye out for anyone trying to steal. If I caught them, I'd detain them. Having worked private security before, it was a pretty nice gig. There was one corporate policy, however, that none of us could ever really understand. For reasons known only to the executives in their distant offices, they mandated a weekly quota of shoplifter apprehensions, which we called stops. We were required to have a minimum of 3 stops every single week. That was rarely a problem. Between the 4 of us on the LP team, we usually averaged about 10 stops a week, which is just shy of 2 a day. And we weren't just catching people grabbing charging cables. Most of the stops involved expensive electronics. We easily paid our own salaries many times over and saved the company an astronomical amount of money. Until one fateful week, Saturday rolled around, marking the end of our work week. All 4 of us from the loss prevention team were called into the office. Our store manager, a man I'll call Mr. Henderson, looked uncomfortable. He informed us that only 2 stops had been made for the entire week, meaning we hadn't met our quota. Because of this, he had contacted corporate, and they had given him a directive to save on payroll costs. All loss prevention personnel were to be given the entire next week off, unpaid. Mr. Henderson made his decision to save a few hundred on payroll, completely unaware that this single act of short-sightedness would lead to a 6-figure hemorrhage from his store's inventory. As a so-called deterrent, an extra cashier would be scheduled to stand by the door. It was a laughable replacement for 4 trained professionals. I later found out this was a tactic other stores were using as a way to phase out plainclothes LP teams altogether. A full week of no pay did not go over well. For me, the timing was particularly awful. My rent was due, my dog had just racked up some vet bills, and my nephew's birthday was just around the corner. All of my coworkers and I pushed back hard. We tried to reason with him. We reminded him how we consistently blew past our quota, how the value of the merchandise we recovered paid for our salaries many times over, and just how laughably ineffective a single, untrained cashier would be as a security measure. It was all useless. By the end of the meeting, Henderson was visibly flustered but refused to budge. He insisted we just stay home. Think of it like a vacation, he said, with a forced smile. We all had paid time off available, but he shot that down immediately, saying we couldn't use it. It's about cutting losses for the company, he said. Cutting losses. If only he knew. Before I had even walked out of the store, the seeds of a plan for vengeance were already beginning to sprout. I went home feeling pissed off and completely wronged. Now, I had a few friends, or maybe acquaintances is a better word, who operated in the shadier circles of the city. They were mostly alright, but they knew people who were definitely not. I'm talking about dealers, addicts, and maybe even some gang members if you believed the rumors. They had their usual hangouts, typically one of 3 parks in town. So, after letting off some steam at home, I started making my rounds. The conversation was always the same. I'd show up looking annoyed, they'd ask me what was wrong, and I'd lay it all out. Not too good, I'd say. Electromart just gave the entire loss prevention team the week off to save a little money. Looks like I'm missing a whole paycheck. Inevitably, someone would probe for more details. I'd casually confirm that, yes, for the entire week, anyone could walk into the store and grab whatever they wanted without having to worry about a single undercover LP watching them. The plan was working when I saw a Facebook post from someone I hadn't even talked to, asking his friends if it was true that Electromart had no security for the week. Word gets around fast. My part was done. All I had to do was go home, grab a 30-pack of beer, and let the chaos unfold. And it did. People lost their minds. A massive amount of product walked out the door every single day. We're not talking about small items. People were apparently strolling out with giant flat-screen TVs, blowing right past the cashier at the door who usually wasn't paying attention anyway. Tablets, laptops, gaming consoles, they all vanished. Someone even managed to get several cell phones out of a locked display case. On Wednesday, not even halfway through my unpaid week off, my phone rang. It was work. I let it go to voicemail. Listening to the message, I couldn't help but crack a smile. It was Mr. Henderson, asking me, no, begging me, to please come in and work a full shift because of some problems they'd been having. The desperation in his voice was my victory anthem. My little scheme had worked perfectly. I didn't respond, even if I'd wanted to. I was already pretty deep into a six-pack. He called again the next day. This time, I answered. "Oh, gee, boss, I'm so sorry," I said, putting on my most apologetic voice. "I'm actually 8 hours away at the beach right now. I thought going out of town would be a good idea since you said to treat this like a vacation." In reality, I was still in my pajamas, drinking coffee and watching Breaking Bad. The next day, there was no call. The company had been forced to bus in LP personnel from other stores and had to pay for a uniformed police officer to stand by the door. I can only imagine how many calls the local police department had received from that store over the past few days. When I finally went back to work after my vacation, 2 new policies were tacked to the bulletin board. First, at least one LP associate must be on the floor at all times from open to close. Second, our old weekly stop quota was gone. It was replaced with a monthly quota based on the total dollar amount of merchandise we recovered, a much more flexible and reasonable metric that we would have no problem meeting. Well, 3 of us would. One of my coworkers had smartly used his week off to find a new job. Good for him. It's a shame the company couldn't see what was coming. As one commenter on my story later pointed out, this kind of thing has happened before. They noted, "I used to work for Montgomery Wards about 2 years before they went under. After I left they fired all of their LP staff. Some friends of mine who still worked there said people, both employees and customers, were stealing anything they could get their hands on. TVs, stereos, computers, $500 watches. Unbelievably bad idea to fire them." This reveals corporate's greatest fatal flaw, their complete detachment from the on-the-ground reality of their stores, an arrogance that ultimately sealed their fate. I never got the exact numbers, but I know the total loss for that 1 week was well into the 6-figure range. I thought about finding a new job myself, but it wasn't necessary. A company that makes a decision that catastrophic must have deeper financial problems. And sure enough, the entire Electromart chain folded just 2 months later. Suddenly, I found myself getting paid unemployment to drink beer and watch Netflix. Eventually, I landed a much better paying job with a private security firm. A few days after the whole mess, I ran into some of my shadier acquaintances, who were proudly showing off their brand new iPads. I have a pretty good idea how they got them. Ultimately, the company learned a hard lesson in the most expensive way possible. If you treat your essential employees as disposable costs, you'll end up paying a much higher price in the end. Have you ever seen a company make a penny-wise, pound-foolish decision? Let me know in the comments below.